Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of All Things Litigation Funding. My name is Ted Farrell. I am the founder of Litigation Funding Advisors. We have not only an outstanding guest today, but we've done it. We're having a gimmick episode. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, I want to welcome Eamon Walsh. Eamon, welcome aboard. Tell our listeners about yourself, who you are, what you do, and then we'll get cooking.
Well, first off, Ted, thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to talk to a titan of industry.
Flattery will get you everywhere, my friend. That is how the pod works. That's how it works.
Hey, you're the only guy I see at conferences that spend probably more time on the phone at the conference than talking to people that the conference you went to go to attend.
It's all networking. It's all networking, no matter how you do it. Exactly.
So why don't I do this, Ted? Why don't I give you the 1-minute flyover of how I mistakenly ended up in this space?
Sure.
And you can dive right in with your hard-hitting questions.
Okay, they will be hard-hitting. The answers will at first be evasive, and then we will put you to the fire. So let's hear it. How'd you get? So first of all, I will just say, spoiler alert: Eamon is not a lawyer. Eamon is also not a litigation funder. But I think, as you're going to hear, he is very plugged in this space and operates in a, I'd say, he attaches at a key area here. So let's get into it.
So my 1-minute flyover is sort of serendipitous in that I started off my career building databases for pharma companies. My first job out of college was locked in a room with 20 developers where we built the database that handled every aspect of consumer interaction for AstraZeneca, all the way from the pharmacy redemption records to how AstraZeneca was interacting with them to keep them on therapy, aka hooked on the drug. So I have worked for either in-house or in a consultancy capacity.
That's the term, on therapy. That's a nice way to put it.
They call it on therapy. Others may say just keep them on our drug, but we like to say on therapy and patient, not claim it.
That's fine.
So I've worked for Boehringer, I've worked for AstraZeneca, I've worked for Pfizer, just about all the major pharma players. Originally hailing from Boston. And then I went to go work a number of years at JP Morgan and IBM, and I found myself sitting in the glass tower of a very large agency where I led marketing for all lead gen for Equinox, Bristol Myers Squibb, Samsung North America Consumer Division, managing a team of a little bit over $50 million a month in ad spend as the head of data science and strategy. Until I get a call from a law firm and they're like, hey, we're looking for like a COO, CMO, someone that could help us out that's from the outside. So I said, of course, I'm happy to go and have a conversation. Little did I know I was probably talking to one of the top leadership firms in the country, where I ended up, being retained and working with Whites and Luxembourg in New York, where I kind of got my start. And I kind of looked at it and took my sort of MBA handbook out and I said, slow to adopt technology, little application of data, really large margin, and a growing total available market. This reads something right out of a Harvard case study as to what makes an attractive business to disrupt. So here I am sort of sitting in, the catbird seat of wearing a white badge, meeting with everyone. I mean, the first time I went to Masterworks Made Perfect, my eyes were wide open because I had spent years working at IBM and other industries where every margin, every dollar was closely monitored. And here it was like, it was like going back to the 1980s. I felt like I was out of a Wall Street movie.
It was like
right?
Hot Tub Time Machine. Yeah, it is a little bit.
Oh my God, it was hilarious. And I'm sitting there like, so let me get this straight. You don't know your cost per case, but you're sort of projecting this, or you don't know fallout, or how are you protecting against duration, and all these key themes that kind of came out, which led me to, ultimately branching out and opening up a boutique business where I was, sort of the hired gun that went into some of these larger firms to help them from an operations perspective and looking at their entire value chain, building out these sort of, large dashboards and data sets to help them have better visibility to manage their business. And, it was a really, it's been a really interesting last 6 years of looking at some of the larger books of overall mass tort and PI players, because I'm looking at it more of an operational efficiency play, which has, led me to be retained by some of the larger funders to look at things from a sort of the third tripod. I'm not a litigator, I'm not a banker. They're looking at it and saying, Eamon, what do you see from an operations perspective here so that we can get better capital efficiencies? And that's been the last sort of 5-6 years in a nutshell of just looking at this space with eyes wide open.
Interesting. And so your current company goes by the name of
To be named or to be defined. The current company, well, I'll fast forward. As someone who was put in charge of helping firms understand what was happening.
By the way, that was my leading question for you. I do know what
that was your leading question.
That
Oh,
was my
sorry.
leading question. That's right. That was like a fill in the blank. Yeah.
Fill in the blank led me to build a company along with some fantastic partners by the name of Advoc8se. And we do a couple of things. We help funders understand the integrity of dockets from the overall file integrity perspective. We also help firms, whether it's a plaintiff fact sheet or helping them identify fraudulent marketers, all the way to filing on behalf of the firm within MDL. So we can be thought of as a variable cost, full service, soup to nuts back office company, because look, sometimes it doesn't make sense for a firm to have 100, 200 people on staff, given the overall way that different torts flex up and down. Is something that we help with.
Yeah, and that's a key thing. I think that it's, look, if you look at a traditional billable hour law firm, if they're big and there's, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, there's usually a large layer of professional staff. But of course, that is afforded in large part because there's, relatively consistent and predictable monthly cash flows in those businesses, right? So you can say, yes, we can have a CFO, and the CFO can have 2 people working for her, and we can have all these other things there because, we send out invoices and we get paid net 30, whereas in, mass tort, it can be 0, 0, 0, 0, and it all comes in. So, all right. So now we're going to get into the gimmick, which was your idea, and I think it's a great one. So today we're going to talk about 5 of the biggest things going on in sort of, I would just call the plaintiff side of the V. And what I think we're going to do is we're going to tease them out a little bit. But I want to really talk about how Advoc8se kind of works in these. So the first thing is, look, everyone in the business knows that the mass tort world is in a period now where many of the largest cases where much of the money has been spent have just gone longer than people had underwritten them to. And so there's all these opportunities to do refis. So that's not news to anyone. But what I thought would be interesting, Eamon, is for you to talk about, okay, well, now that law firm has upsized its loan and now they've gotten the refinance, but what is next, and what are the steps that Advoc8se can help them take to kind of, to like ramp up their business and do it better?
I'll give you my quick high level hit list, right? Number one, they've got to have solid marketers with track records of being able to ethically actually acquire claimants and be able to feel comfortable with the indemnification and the insurance that those marketers have, that they're going to do that. That's number one. Number two, and this is not talked about enough, every marketer in this space has what's called a cure or replacement period. Sometimes it's 7 to 15 days. The law firm should have in place a QA process to be able to enforce that if they agree to something and it doesn't materially come over as agreed to, or it's a fringe case, that they kick it back. That is the quickest way to get efficiency on capital of 10 to 20 points. right off the bat. The second thing they need to be doing is getting in touch with and filling out the questionnaire, or if there is one, a plain fact sheet as soon as possible, um, and doing a soft proof check of injury. All of those things particularly cost money, but the last is one of the things we did in pharma is to keep people on quote unquote therapy is we built content labs of exercise routines, healthy diets, all of this sort of women's and men's health content to make sure we kept people on therapy. But in this situation, you want to stay in touch with those plaintiffs to ensure that you don't lose track of them over the 5 or 7 year duration. So it's, have good marketers, be able to vet them, have a good QA and process, make sure you get that, tackle that questionnaire now and not 5 years down the road. Do a soft proof of check or a full check of actual injury. And then stay in touch with these people, actually deliver them content. Look, selfishly, we do all of those things as a outsourced vendor for some of these firms because look, they don't have the writers or the content folks to produce it. They don't have an army of people that can run QA or put AI layers on it. But those to me are sort of my 4 or 5 best practices because where I see too often happening, Ted, is a funder gives someone money, they may sign off on 1 or 2 marketers, they get a retainer, and then they put a maybe 30-40% discount on fallout.
Right.
That fallout can all be managed and prevented.
By
right. Just be doing best practices. And I'm not talking about rocket science here. It's best practices. But how often are you taking the firm that you're funding and putting them against that type of basic scorecard?
Right. And I think too, the rising tide lifts all boats. The better the firm is doing, the more chance there is that the loan will amortize and the people who've done all this work and get paid. Okay. So that was hot topic number 1. We're on to topic 2 here. There are large mass torts that have settled within the last 12 months. And I'm thinking about the earplugs. I'm thinking about Zantac. And I'm sure your phone was ringing when that happened because people said, great, it's settled. What do we do to actually get these people paid? So tell me a little bit about what you saw with 3M, what you saw with Zantac, and how you're helping firms, make sure that the clients you've hung in there with them for 4, 5, 6 years are actually going to get paid.
Well, I would back up 1 click, Ted, and I would say if those firms had a very sophisticated data room where defense could see that all of their files are essentially intact and fully compensable, it potentially would have helped force a settlement earlier in the game. But we are where we are, right?
Well, that gets, by the way, let me just, because I was thinking about this when we were, the dirty little secret in mass tort that the defense bar doesn't want you to know is the following. In these large mass torts where there are these widespread allegations that certain products, certain drugs cause certain injuries, if you can actually show the factual predicate for, I use that thing, this is my actual diagnosis of that industry and this real doctor, they will pay. Those cases pay and settle. So everyone says, oh, the defense drags it out. They do this. Well, of course, the defense has a client. But if you come in with unassailable proof that you use the product, that you were diagnosed with this, that you are real and show it to them, those are the cases that pay. And so that is just so vital to all this.
And too often I go to these conferences and people are talking about how many retainers they have.
Right.
And I said, well, how many do you have where there is unassailable proof and you have a fully compensable packet? Because I would argue it's better to have 100 of those than 200 retainers, because that enables you to do 2 things. A, you have a real seat at the table with defense, but B, if you're a referring firm, you potentially can have a different conversation with leadership because they don't have any legwork that they need to do to build that packet.
Right.
So it changes potential splits of how things play out if you do right by the client from the beginning, as opposed to waiting. Because what you're getting at now, Ted, with your question is, well, now we got to go find these people that potentially haven't been spoken to in a couple of years.
Right. And I think that, an anecdote I sort of have about that is I was taking a car to go to the airport to go to Mass Tort. And the guy said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to this thing, blah, 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 blah." And one of these big things is this 3 year post. The guy goes, "Oh, I'm in that lawsuit." I said, "Oh, and I said, "Who's your law firm?" He goes, "Oh, I signed up with a bunch. They all just kept emailing me. I don't even know what their name is." Right. And by the way, like, he didn't sign up with a bunch because he's trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes or he's trying to cheat them. But someone sent an email. He ripped through a DocuSign, didn't hear from anyone for 2 years. Your case has gone nowhere. So that's the thing. But the other thing is, I would like, for people who maybe are not in mass tort, when we're talking about unassailable proof, this is what people are talking about. I mean, I remember, saying, okay, well, they'll look through these files and there were all these x-rays. And I thought, like, do we really need the x-ray? Like, the doctor said this and they said, no, the x-ray reads the SKU number of the IVC filtered device because of the 37 models, only 14 of them were supposed to cause the alleged injury. So in fact, your doctor saying I put in an IVC filter from this manufacturer, that doesn't get you paid, right? And so what first seemed like overkill, I realized was in fact, no, like, this is what it takes. And if law firms are going to say, I will, represent you on a contingent fee basis to vindicate your rights in this case, well, that's what it takes. And either they can do it or people like Advoc8se can do it, but someone's got to do it, because if not, they're just names on a spreadsheet somewhere. They're never going to get paid.
And it brings up two other things. That is, if I were a funder, I'd be asking the firm, what is your claimant or plaintiff engagement strategy? So that doesn't happen, because everyone talks about dual rep, right? The threat of dual rep. That is the definition.
Can you tell people what a dual rep is real quick who are listening? What is a dual, and when does it come up? What is
it's when your Uber driver signs up with multiple law firms because the original law firm didn't really think to do anything more besides get his signature and not build any type of relationship with him. Because the second point that gets to is, we're seeing crossover in some mass torts where there's data plays to sign people up for multiple torts. But then we're also seeing an opportunity where you think about a first party data strategy. You know what one of the strongest assets large mass tort dockets have that I see completely under leveraged? They have the ability to solicit the person for another claim because they're already their client.
Right.
So think about that Uber driver in the instance of PI. Right. There could be a carryover, right?
Right.
You could put a predictive model on top of certain claimants and say, you know what, I know there's a X% of probability that they're going to qualify for ABC because I have a large enough data set to show that. And the space just doesn't have that level of sophistication, but it really should. But then again, it starts with having a clean data set, knowing who the claimant is, and treating them, like they are the true client that they are.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to move on to topic 3 here. And I'm calling this the legislative response to torts. So obviously, everyone is aware of Camp Lejeune, of course, but also in the firefighting foam cancer cases, which are the acronym that'll get thrown around because, not everyone who listens to this podcast knows the acronym. This is called the AFFF cases, and that's an acronym for the name of these chemicals. So there's also a bill in Congress to create up a settlement fund that is similar to Camp Lejeune. So, Eamon, I'm really interested in hearing about you with what is the different dynamic there from a typical mass tort where, it starts with just cases being filed all over the country, as opposed to here with Lejeune and AFFF saying, here we have the federal government saying, we understand that certain people have been injured by these things. We're not fighting that. We're not fighting that as a premise, but we're trying to set up a regime to pay them. So how is that blocking and tackling different? And, what are you seeing, and, how are you involved in getting these claimants, compensation for their injuries?
Yeah, interesting question. So we manage a little over $1 billion of legal fees right now on our platform that we're responsible to making sure our clients, being the firms, realize those fees. And in that process, what's become incredibly apparent, especially with Lejeune, and Lejeune has set an interesting precedent, especially with the federal government involved, in that the submission process is going through essentially a centralized database where you have to submit, you have to substantiate, they're gridded out. No longer is this sort of handled in the traditional Excel paperwork land. This is the US government getting sophisticated in the way claims are paid out.
And so again, we're back to the core premise of what does it take for me as the law firm? What do I have to show? What evidence do I need to gather to prove my claim, right? I mean, it's the same kind of blocking and tackling there.
It's the same type of blocking and tackling, except you need to have a small army of API developers and people that know how to move and manipulate data and work with large scale database systems. So the other thing that it's changing is that it's sort of changing the paradigm shift that you potentially have to submit and fee share with a leadership firm. You potentially could acquire the claimants and submit them now.
Yeah.
The core competency has shifted to the ability to process large scale data efficiently.
Yes. Right.
And if you look at what's happened with Lejeune, they've now made it as of, mid-February, as of February 16th, every single claim you have to go into individually and substantiate with a real person. There is no script, there is no automation. There was on the upload front, but now if you have 30,000 claimants, just think of the amount of hours it's going to take in order to be able to substantiate each claim. So the government isn't making it easy, but you've got to be good at these types of systems in order to realize a legal fee, whereas before that level of burden was not as high.
And a lot of people got way over their skis here and said, I'm going to run marketing campaigns. I have 1,000 clients and they're in a 3-person law firm and they don't have a CTO and they don't have an AI strategy and they don't have any of this stuff. And there's just a big bottleneck. Yeah, that's been a real, it's been, like, think of it this way. If I wanted to start a defense side law firm with 2 lawyers or 3 lawyers, but we wanted to have 1,000 clients and be running 900 cases at once, we might need to figure out a way to figure it out, because 3 people just can't get that done. It's just not physically possible. And I think as lawyers, if I sign you up and say I'm going to represent you, right? Like, I have a duty to zealously advocate for you. And if it requires these 15 steps to get done, I really shouldn't be signing you up if I have no ability and no plan to do it.
Yes, but also to the genesis of your question, look at the amount of money that's poured into the space via ABSs, right? You have sophisticated money that's now sharing on the equity economics that's
for
shipping into
housekeeping,
leadership.
For housekeeping, to
Yeah.
keep with our gimmick, that was hot topic number 4. So I just want everyone, because I'm going to get calls and be like, you said 5 things. So ABS, I want to talk about, but keep going. Sorry, but I want to make sure we're sticking with the gimmick here.
Well,
explain what an ABS is really quickly for listeners who don't know what an ABS is, just very quickly.
Sure. So for the longest time through DC, non-attorneys can participate in the economics as if they are actually working and materially contributing to the work product of the firm. What Arizona did is take that as a blueprint, which has been around for a while, and basically remove that requirement. It stands for an alternative business structure. So now you can sit in Switzerland as the capital and have a compliance officer, of which you hire as no different than a W-2 employee, and participate in the pure equity economics of the firm. And you don't have to prove that you've materially are contributing to any aspect of it. So that now really has flooded the gates with large funds coming in and saying, hey, I put the money in, I can share in the actual equity economics. I don't have to saddle a firm with debt, or maybe I do a hybrid. And then I can go hire marketers that acquire the cases and ship them right to leadership. Seems pretty easy to me. This is great.
This is easy. Where do I sign
Yeah,
up for one
so
of these?
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a
And
dry
there's a
heat
lot of
out there in
cautionary
Arizona, right?
tales.
It's a dry heat.
Yeah, I
There's no
mean,
humidity.
there's no humidity. Maybe I'll go there, go golfing, and check a few things out.
There
But the
is someone
danger there is,
there's someone I know, by the way, who works at a funder, and they kind of decided someone was going to have to relocate there, and they basically knew he loved golf more than anyone else, and they got him to do it. So,
it's a hard sell and a difficult life. But the
right,
cautionary tale there is, if you're going to deploy $50 million and spread it across three different leadership firms, they don't have the staff to process what you're sending them.
right.
If
I
you
agree.
if you ask them for a co-counsel report that says, show me all the questionnaires and soft or hard checks you've done on proof of injury. And oh, by the way, show me how many times you've actually engaged or touched one of the clients, appropriately or inappropriately,
Right,
but at least tell me you touched them. That's a very basic scorecard that I would encourage anyone who is co-counsel a large leadership firm to start asking those questions.
right,
Because there's simply what the ABS have done is they've basically put a lot of pressure on those firms to process claims at volume that they may or may not be actually built to do.
right,
Um, so you have to be very careful in thinking, oh, they've gotten all of these awards and they've done this settlement and that settlement. I said, yeah, that's great, but you just tripled their caseload overnight,
right,
and you've got to make sure that they're doing all the blocking and tackling on their end because they're getting the appropriate fee share for doing that particular work product.
right,
So it's really a matter of balancing the economics with who's doing the appropriate end of the work. And if it's not being done on that end, then you as the referring firm, potentially the ABS, should have reason for concern.
right. Okay. So I want to ask you our last topic here is, and you did touch on this earlier, but you were talking about, one of the things that's attractive about the ABS is that potentially you can make it more of an equity structure, such because you don't want to saddle these firms with debt. So much of what's leading these refi charge and what has sort of led to this, this litany of loans that are technically, I would say, are distressed, but they're not distressed because the underlying assets are worthless, but it's because the cases are taking long because of debt. And so a lot of smart credit investors have frankly been burned in mass tort, but now they're moving into personal injury firms. And I know that you all do a lot of work with personal injury firms. And, I'm interested in what you're hearing and perhaps with firms you work with and funders you work with about this pivot to move more towards personal injury and sort of what's going on in those kind of firms that makes them, at least as of February of 2025, seem more attractive than some of the mass tort opportunities out there.
Yeah, I call it the pivot of the blind.
Why don't you tell us what you really feel? Okay, like this is for learning. Okay, this is
Yeah. Well, it's a pivot of the blind to me because the mass tort playbook is relatively straightforward. You can explain it on a napkin, right?
yeah,
Now, in order to truly execute it on it, it's more of a white paper.
mm-hmm.
But the difference in PI is that it's hand-to-hand combat as opposed to carpet bombing,
Mm-hmm.
meaning every claimant has to be vetted on a different set of criteria because the injuries really vary.
Right,
And even if you want to just do motor vehicle accidents, those vary.
right,
And I've had the pleasure of working with some of the largest PI MVA firms in the country where they've entrusted me to go in and audit their entire business. And the level of controls and operational efficiency that's required in those firms compared to a mass tort firm or a mass tort
mm-hmm.
portfolio is immense because
Right,
you have statute of limitations that are running very quickly.
right,
You have potentially multiple um, defendants in cases, and you're going to find basically one or two flavors, right? You're going to find what I call the chop shop that runs volume and settles and moves on, and maybe they cherry pick one or two cases to really litigate. or you're going to find the firms that are more boutique that are only taking the top 10% cases and actually litigating them. So I understand why funders find it attractive in that you can go hit doubles as opposed to home runs, right? In terms of your returns, your duration risk is largely removed to 12 months as opposed to 5 years.
Right. And that's the
But
big, yeah. But I think that is what is I think leading the charges. For example, you can have a very good mass tort law firm that is actually doing well, that might have a year where it has minimal revenue because that is the nature of the cases they settle at once. Whereas a long running personal injury firm is typically going to have, relatively predictable cash flows, such that when you make the loan, you're getting paid down, right? Stuff's coming in every month, as opposed to, every single month they just need money to pull on the line. So economically, I do get why people tend to look at it that way.
well, let's get to a different topic, which is the smart use of financing, right? What I see some folks do, which I think is very practical and intelligent, is that they may have a PI or MVA book where that cash on cash turn just services the mass tort loan and the respective interest so it doesn't compound,
Right.
which I think is really intelligent to have those dual forms of revenue.
Right.
And wish I saw more and more, but understand that I think what we're going to find is that more and more ABSs and sophisticated capital is going to come in and look at it and say, if a okay or poor to subpar PI firm can do $100 million in a tier 2 or tier 3 market a year in gross, imagine what would happen if we put Six Sigma in place and actually we're a little bit more intelligent than our ad buys than a bunch of billboards and radio commercials that run the same every single month and every year. That to me, I think, is the next sort of forefront of what happens when you take Wall Street pedigree combined with world-class operational and marketing and data excellence to start rolling up some of these PI firms. Because look, to their credit, they went into a market, they hung their shingle, and they printed money. And they've printed money for a long time, despite maybe having what you and I may look at as glaring inefficiencies, but they still work.
Right. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, Eamon, we've now done our 5 hot topics. So now it is time for self-promotion. I'm a funder. I'm a law firm. How do I get in touch with Advoc8se? What's the best way? What's the best way to contact you? Like, where do we go?
Best way to reach out is just, you can email me at Eamon, EAMON, at advoc8se.io. Instead of the A, it's an 8. Or you can reach me directly at 413-626-1504.
Or we'll see you on the
And
conference circuit.
unfortunately, it's a circuit I'm trying to get off, but every dog and pony show needs compensable files. So
Perfect.
that might be our new tagline.
That's
Everyone needs transparency. It's the dog and pony show.
Well, you said dog and pony show. What'd you call it? The rush of the blind. So I think we've got some good buzzwords here. So Eamon, as always, a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon. See you, dude. Bye.
You got it. Take care, Ted.